Starting in 1991 with DuPont, Chad quickly moved through various roles, developing a strong understanding of interoperability between not only systems, but also the people who interact with them. Prior to the spinoff of Chemours by DuPont in 2015, Chad supported configuration of multiple control systems, administered the process control network and MES systems, and helped to develop and sustain regulatory programs. Today at Chemours, which is a $6 billion global chemical company, Chad's current focus is on helping to navigate through their ongoing development of a right-sized adaptive security program. Chad has a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology, is GICSP certified, and holds multiple certifications in process control and cybersecurity. So please welcome Chad Vicknair.
Testing, can you hear me? Okay, all right, thank y'all. So just to expand just for a minute on a little bit about myself, I kind of had a unique start with a company called DuPont 27 years ago. Literally started at the site weed eating the ditches during a summer college job. And from there, it's just been one thing from another, moving up through the company. So I've actually been inside of reactors cleaning them. I've also sat at the control board running them. So it's very personal to me. I know what it's like to be in control of a 36,000-pound reactor. It's all very personal. I take safety very seriously, and as I got into control systems and configuration in the networks, I took security very seriously. So it kind of gives me a little bit of a unique perspective, and I'm a little bit more sensitive about some topics than other people's are sometimes. But it's been a good experience. So the way this kind of odd topic grew, the title for this talk was out of my my personal, which ones? There we go. My personal desire to have lifecycle management, because I spent a lot of time at the computer, a lot of hours looking at the security stuff, and I wanted a break from it, and I wanted something to kind of disconnect and turn off that evil bit or that security bit for a little bit so I could stop thinking. That's what my brain looked like all day long. And so I live out in the country, and for me, at the end of the day, I love hopping on a tractor and doing some bush hogging just to, suck up the sunshine, very little thought, just relaxing. And but what I realized, I only had so much acreage, and I could only bush hog so many times a week, and I ran out of stuff to do. So I was like, I need some more stuff to do on the tractor, And I was driving home one day and looking at my neighbor's field. He grows corn, and I was like, boy, that sure is pretty and nice, and just looked real relaxing and soothing. And I was like, I'm going to do that. Get me some implements for my tractor, and I'm going to disconnect some more from security. I was in for a surprise. So I started looking into it, and if you're going to do farming in a big way, I needed to do it sustainable. There's a lot of risk with it, and one incident can take you down, just like security. One good freeze, one good bug that came through that you didn't have protected on your crops and different things. So I was like, oh gosh, this looks very familiar, But I thought, you know what? I'm just going to talk to my neighbor and see what he does, and I'll just do what he does, and then my field will look just like his, and I can enjoy it. And then, but I'm a smart guy, so I'm going to research industry best practice too. And hey, armed with all my information technology, right? I'm sure I can be more efficient than that guy, that farmer, with his operational technology. Another big surprise. So wow, look at all of the things I needed to start considering and thinking about. And as I couldn't help but as I looked at things, trying to decide, okay, what are my assets going to be? What am I going to grow? Okay, different vegetables, different types of fruits, different varieties, there's different hybrids. It reminded me of, oh gosh, these are my ICS assets, my vendor models and versions. Looking at topology. Am I, going to plant rows, a field? What's my architecture? Am I going to do virtual? Am I going to do hydroponics? And it was like I just couldn't disconnect, and it was getting very frustrating. But I really wanted to do this thing, so I kept digging. My water source, how do I connect and get the material that's needed to sustain my assets from one location to the other? Source destination protocol, right? Moving on to, what are my vulnerabilities with diseases and insects? What, predators do I need to be concerned about on my crops? And how am I going to control those? Bugs and viruses, application controls. Physical security, what type of predators do I have? Deer, rabbits, whatever. Same thing. How are we controlling physical access to our assets within the facilities? Equipment, what's my run, maintain, support? What type of devices am I going to have in place to support my environment? And then finally, looking at metrics, cost, and benefit analysis. Because to be, in this industry, if we try and secure everything, it's just not feasible in a lot of cases, and we can't do it. So we really have to spend the time to really understand our environments so that we make wise decisions in our investments, and we're spending the money and the dollars in the right places, maybe on our high-risk equipment, maybe looking at low risk a little bit differently so that we can be competitive in the marketplace. So as I started going through this, I started thinking about it a little differently. So as I looked at my assets, if I looked at local practice and industry standard on how to mitigate, they kind of recommended, well, you're probably best doing vegetables, and if you want to do corn, those are some good choices and varieties, but I'm unique. I only have so much time, so much money, so much resources. I only have 2 sons. I only have so much labor available, and and there's a degree of risk that I was willing to sustain, right? I wanted to do it, enjoy it, but I don't want to lose money and have it cost me. So I'm unique. So when I looked at my best fit, for me it was more of the ground vegetables, the root type vegetables, because it was less involvement that I had to do with it. I didn't have to be out there tending to it every day. It could kind of sustain itself for longer periods of time before I had to go out and mess with it. Same when I started looking at topology, they kind of recommended, plant big fields, long rows, and, your soil, we have good topsoil in this area, and all you need is a little lime and nitrogen, and you're good to go. Well, that wasn't the case because my property is unique. And again, I don't have the time to be able to manage a huge field, so I was looking at more of a smaller row type operation. I have a lot more clay. I live on top of a hill, more clay in my soil. I also found out doing soil sample that I was lacking molybdenum, which without molybdenum, you don't get good nitrogen uptake. Again, more uniqueness. I'm not just like my neighbor. I can't take that off-the-shelf solution and expect it to do the same things for me that it does for him. Water, again, best practice, everybody says use a well and use drip irrigation. Well, I have a pond and we get a lot of rainfall, and drip irrigation is hard to set up. I'd rather just use row irrigation. Same thing, and going down the line, you're looking at unique diseases, what my predators were, industry best practice and local practice versus what was the best right size fit for me. I live right up against a paper company property, 800 acres, so I have a lot more predators that have access to my property. I have a lot more bugs and disease that come out of those unmanaged woods. Physical security, again, related to predators and things of that. Do I have the right physical security in place for my assets to protect them? And so on and so forth. So we go through equipment. This is what was recommended. Again, because of my time, if I use this to plow my field, it's going to take me several passes, several days. If I buy a rototiller, I'm done in 3 hours and I'm on my way. So again, because of my unique situation, my resources that are available to me, and what I can put into my business and my risk, the decisions were different. And then finally, labor yield and market. Looking at, what was the best way. They recommended marketing at the bigger markets. We're just kind of interested in personal consumption, and I'll do a fruit stand on the side of the road for my kids so they can know a little something about business. So I'm very unique. So I kind of started coming, again, my brain just can't disconnect from this stuff. So I was like, oh, just this stuff would just pop in my head. And I started thinking about, so for a successful farm, I need to plant beans and corn. So a farm framework and reliable monitoring, knowing your metrics. You need to know that for your infrastructure and your control systems and your ICS. I'm sorry, let me back up one. Planting, process layers, and network topology. You really need to have a deep understanding about that. You need to get down and dirty, put on some coveralls, get out there in the field and see how all that stuff is interconnected and how it actually works. Because sometimes what we see on drawings that people provide to us aren't necessarily what's actually out there in the field. Beans, the non-volatile firmware is a little bit of a stretch, but baseline existing assets, non-volatile firmware and software. You have to know that stuff if you're gonna know if there's a vulnerability that you need to be concerned about. You have to really understand all the information about all of those different types of assets. And then finally, corn was the cyber operations risk negation. It's a different way of looking at mitigation, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Actually, let me back up again because I should have explained it here. So mitigation should be your overall program. It should be everything that's built into your life cycle. Everything you're doing in your ICS security program should be to mitigate risk. risk negation is actually looking at it a little bit deeper and validating those risks. Does that risk really exist in my environment? Have I pen tested and improved that it can actually be compromised? Or am I going to spend a lot of money trying to protect something that really can never be executed because of my physical arrangement, because of the things I already have in place, my other layers of defense? Spending the time so that you spend the money and make your decisions based on your actual risk, not just what industry says you should do or regulation says you could do. Because from a regulatory perspective, you could be, you might be compliant, you might be completely at risk. Or you could do a good job and have no risk and not be compliant. So there's a balance in between there. So this was an attack. It's probably little published, but it was a Cisco Trojan horse attack of 2017. On December 8th, 2017 at 8:14 a.m., an insider aided by a natural disaster successfully penetrated a controlled mesh network, resulting in total destruction of the target's assets. So, yes, he knows he's on the wrong side of the fence, and 6 inches of snow in South Louisiana is a natural disaster. So the crop I planted last year, when the snow came, it wiped me out. It also knocked a tree down, which took the fence down, and my horse jumped in the field and ate what was left. So no matter how much planning you can do, there's always something you're not thinking of. So what are some key learnings as we transition over to the ICS security? So my farm is unique. My company is very unique. Areas within my farm are unique, and locations within my company are unique. Sometimes on a large piece of property, what works in farming here may not work a couple of acres over this way because the conditions are different. I learned that irrigating from my pond affected my safety system, because out in the country our ponds are our fire ponds. When a fire truck comes, they throw a hose in the pond. That's how you put your fires out. So if I use that for my irrigation, I run my pond level too low, I've just affected my safety system. Well, if I interrogate my network too hard, I could be affecting my safety system. And moving on, so runoff from the water could affect my pond. Requirements have impact on my company, regulations, brand, and stakeholders. This is a big, don't rush to go live. Take the time. Don't treat ICS projects like IT projects. They don't work. You can't set a go live date and try and just, we got to get it done, we got to get it done. Take the time, learn. Something new comes up, take a step back, take the time to get it right before you move on. Pilot tests, invaluable. Spend the time and money on doing them. Some assets work better together, beans and corn. That's good rotational crops. Beans provide nitrogen, utility, and make sure you get a good corn crop. There's a lot of products out there that just work better together. We just heard about one that works very well with the PAS. Just sometimes look for those opportunities. And all these things you learn about your unique operation is really a trade secret, and it's security. And that's why I think it was Harvey that mentioned, it's sensitive when you come to give talks like this, because you don't want to reveal too much about your company, because you're kind of making it easy. As a hacker, if I'm going to get into your company and I know what products you're using, you've just made my job a whole lot easier, because I know where to start. I'm going to go after those vulnerabilities first, because security products have vulnerabilities too. Let me get a sip of drink real quick. Face is drying out. All right. So I can be compliant with organic growers' standards and still be at risk. And this is what I was saying. I can be compliant with regulatory standards and still be at risk. And vice versa, I can have no risk and not be compliant. So we need to be careful when we put our programs in place. Ask what do you mean by that? I've been in several conversations with IT, OT folks, and we start talking about level 1, level 2, or level 3, and I realize these guys are thinking switching and routing. We're talking about the Purdue model. We start talking about 3-tier architecture. Again, Purdue model, they're thinking about client-server architecture. So we need to be careful that when we're converging the two different organizations, that we're asking a question, do you understand? Use pictures, use descriptions, make sure people are receiving what you're saying so that you can be effective. And then be prepared to change and to adapt, because change is inevitable. Things come up, new things happen, and you're going to learn as you start a program. You'll run into things, and then you need to back up a little bit, take a few steps back, and go forward. So what's your best fit solution? This is in no way all inclusive. It's missing a lot of stuff, and again, I'm not advocating any of these projects, or if something's missing, I'm not saying it's not. It was just an example to kind of show off that same type of detailed diagram. That these are all things that you need to consider and think about as you're putting your program together. And each one of us is unique. Every company is going to be unique. Even within the same company, sometimes you'll have sister sites, and they're still going to have differences where you can't just a lot of times just take something and drop it from site to site. You're going to have to do some tweaking and modification. So where do you start? You need to start with foundation. I'm a firm believer you need to start with top support and drive it down. I've been in the seat where we tried for years trying to get support and solutions from bottom up. It was very difficult. Usually we get cut off by middle management that didn't want to be the guy to go ask his manager for additional money for something. So drive it top down if at all possible, and establish good, strong governance up front so that as you move the program through your organization, there's support and structure for it. Choose a framework. NIST has a great framework. There's others out there, but something that you can standardize on and something that you can use as guidance for your program. Document your existing topology. Again, you need to know what you have today. You need to understand it well so that you can make good decisions. Also know your plumbing, your infrastructure, your unmaintained systems, and choose an asset inventory solution. Definitely passive, and you definitely want something that goes deep. You want to get that layer one, and even now we have smart instrumentation, and PAS even has some capabilities where they can read smart instrumentation. There's other companies out there that can do that too. It's good to make sure that you get a complete inventory, because we saw demonstrated at Black Hat a few years ago, this gentleman read a 4 to 20 milliamp signal all the way up into an SAP system. So is that a point of entry? Definitely. Conduct a risk assessment and choose an experienced ICS integrator, somebody that knows the products, knows the system. Take the time to really, again, understand what are your actual risks, not just here's a best practice, go do all this. Because sometimes we try to implement things that are very difficult in the ICS space, and it becomes more of a challenge and more of an issue than if we had taken the time to really figure out, is that even a valid risk, or is that a good solution? Maybe we should back up and do something different instead. Framework helps with that because it gives you a list of choices of things that you can do. Develop documents and document your solutions. Make sure you document everything, get it published and standardized on. Establish monitoring. Measure your effectiveness of the solutions, and revise and repeat. It's an evergreen process because it's always changing. And I'll leave the CEO stuff y'all to read off the slides or whatever, but it's just some comments for something that CEOs should think about and understand, and you should work to try and help them to understand that. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes you need an analogy, maybe farming, right? Something to kind of bridge the gap, find out what makes them click or think, and and try and find a way to present your concerns to them in a way that they'll be able to consume it. This is a life cycle from NIST as well, and kind of how we view it. We have our executive board and our CEO. They kind of set the expectation for maturity of our company from a cyber perspective and our level of risk. CIO, that's kind of making decisions around the mission priority and our budget. Then we have our CISO and our ICS team, where we start to evaluate and talk about what are the best fit appropriate solutions based on our budget and risk. Proposing those, it goes down to a steering team that's comprised of shop floor operations, IT, security, regulatory folks, anybody that's needed to make sure we're making good decisions here. And then it's actually a technology or a solution that we've chosen that's going to work. Again, because if we choose oh, perfect, thank you. My throat's super dry. So you want to make sure that you've actually chosen something that's going to be successful, and it's not going to be something impossible for the folks on your shop floor to implement. Once that's agreed upon, it becomes a policy or a standard. It's implemented at the shop floor by IT and OT. We're driving culture change and convergence in that portion as well. Okay, thank you. And then we put in monitoring, to where we've taken everything that we're asking and requiring at this point. We now want to measure and monitor it. So we put a system in place to actually do that for us. And I'll talk a little bit about how we accomplish that in a minute. We take that information, the results of that, we feed it up to a corporate server so that we now have corporate visibility in all our sites' performance against those measures so that we can make decisions. And then another piece of that puzzle is we're working on also doing a risk dashboard, because the stuff we're measuring at the site is only kind of site specific, but then there's more things. We start talking about risk conformance, the overall risk strategy of the company. And maybe it's not something we're measuring at the site, but it might be questions around, how aware is the board of our cybersecurity position and their awareness and participation in that model. So those are more subjective type things that you want to take into consideration. And then also gives us the ability to track maturity over time. As this thing churns and we get new data, we make new decisions, we implement new policies and practices, and we measure them, are we improving, or are we going backwards, or are we flatlining? Because that's the kind of stuff, again, that the board wants to see. They want to see that we're making good decisions. All right, so this is how we started to just try and measure this stuff. Way back, we started doing these assessments. We had several regulated sites, and so we had to do these audits, and so we do it with spreadsheets, right? We had our standards. We broke our standards down into a bunch of questions to start to determine whether or not we're in compliance. We'd visit a site and we'd sit down and we'd start going through it. In most cases, we say, oh yeah, we do that, we do that, we do that. And you don't have unlimited time, so you can only validate and test so many things. Not very effective. It was usually just a snapshot in time. And very inconsistent on audit trail, because you're relying on folks to use some method. Some are using SharePoint, some are using Lotus Notes, some are using a notebook. I mean, everybody was doing something different. Very inconsistent audit trail. And we wanted to improve that. We wanted to fix that. Because part of the problem, too, is when you rely on these types of audits, you don't get a true picture. And if folks say, well, oh yeah, we do all that, we're 100% compliant with everything we're supposed to be doing, yet at the same time they're saying, well, we don't have resources to keep up all this. Well, that's not what the data says. The data says you're doing fine. So the challenge is coming up with a system to be able to actually measure that. So we took, using the product with cyber integrity, we developed logic to actually go in, and every question we asked on here, we came up with logic or a truth table to be able to determine that digitally. Some things are still subjective because it may be a workflow that goes out to the appropriate person saying, have you gone through your backup procedure this year to make sure it's correct? Yes, no, okay. But everything creates audit trail. It's all captured and it's all real time pretty much every day. So we started off in July with a beta version, deployed it, one of our first sites. Kind of looks similar to this. I've redacted and changed some of this just for confidentiality. But the gray part is interesting because the stuff they're doing is okay, but we want to know why is that gray? What does that mean? Is it lack of resources? Is it the wrong resource? Is it a technology that we're asking them to implement that's not feasible for that particular control system? So we started to study that. We actually found a few bugs. We fixed some stuff, and then we got it a little bit better. And then we said, okay, well, what's that remaining gray area? Well, a lot of it was things that were around exceptions. A particular control system that could not do something, so it was never going to meet compliance. So then we built in an exception capability directly into the tool. And then finally, in our last version with the exception thinking process, we're starting to see better performance. Now, this is a very interesting area because this is where we may have the incorrect security measures in place to actually address those concerns, and we may have to back up and do something different. So it's visual management too. Again, before everybody was just relying on their knowledge of the standards of what they should do, when they should do it, SharePoint, Lotus Note, whatever method they were using to remind themselves to do it. Everything's driven by the tool now. Shows their current performance, sends out workflow notifications. If a new asset shows up on the network, somebody gets a notification, let them know, hey, should this be there? Has a risk assessment been done? Upload the supporting documentation. Completes the audit trail cycle. Closed loop. So this is our dashboard. You drill down. We broke it down into the NIST functions. If you click on a function, it drills down into the actual standards that are being evaluated within that function. If you click further, you can get the details of what's being assessed against that particular item. And if something's not in compliance, you can click on it, and then you have an issue. You can either go fix the issue if it's something real, Thank you. Or you can complete a workflow if it was out of compliance because the workflow hasn't been completed. Or you can add a 90-day exception if it's something the equipment's down. There's no way you can gather information from it because it's being swapped out. Or an annual exception if it's something that the product's not capable of doing. Everything captured in one location. If it's a 90-day and the issue's resolved sooner, you can remove this exception. It's a management tool and a management platform that helps to direct and create the behaviors that we're looking for in our shop floor operations. And then the next step is centralized monitoring. So we take all that information, we pull it up, so we have visibility of all of our processes. And the next piece we're working on is doing, as I mentioned, risk conformance, the bigger picture. As an overall company, how do we perform? What are our overall policies and standards, and what's our overall risk appetite and goals? Are we meeting that? And can we track that over time by looking at maturity? And factoring in what are our actual risks with the assets we have with the new functionality with the NWD database to be able to identify those things. So now we can start to surgically target things that are important to us. We can have the right discussions. We can also start to look at our different areas of high, medium, and low risk and have conversations around, what do we need to do to create additional segmentation so we don't have to secure that PLC running a shrink wrapper in a warehouse with a card reader and a camera. We can do something a little bit different, and we can focus on this guy over here that's really going to cause us some problems. I did it. I don't know if I could do that in 20.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
And we'd like to take a minute or two and open things up for questions. We have one up here.
Yes.
Hey, Chad, great presentation. I like the way you kept it simple, right? One question I have for you is, in your culture change of converging IT and OT, we tend to run into conflicts within tooling coming in from the enterprise side and lack of tooling in the past dealing with the OT side. How did you get to the solution that you used in order to pull a comprehensive kind of assurance and documentation-driven software package versus the ones that are out there that people are using in the enterprise space?
So what we found was we had a kind of a natural distribution of things that were happening at the plant site already. Even though they were different organizations, we had sites where IT and OT had already started working together, and they had good relationship. We had sites where they didn't talk, and we had everything in between. And so education is a big piece of this, and that's so what we've done is we've kind of taken our entire project, since we're doing it as a global initiative, and we're driving culture change with it, because putting this system in the way we're implementing it requires both IT and OT folks to work together. There's a lot of devices that sit behind process control firewalls at facilities that are actually IT managed, right? You may have historians that are maybe more traditionally managed by IT folks, or different types of devices versus the actual, getting down into your control system gear. So there's kind of a natural mix that already exists in there, and finding the solutions. Another thing we did is our organization used to report to legal through our chief security officer, and we made a move over to Matt's organization. We report to Matt as our CISO now in the IT group, so we're part of the IT security team. So we all talk now about solutions. We look for opportunities to leverage those softwares and capabilities that create value, and we're looking at integration right now with PAS, with other tools that we're bringing on board.
So in your organization, who is accountable for security in the OT space? Is it a person, a single person, or a team?
Our chief information officer is responsible for all security. He owns all risks, top down, IT and OT.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for one more question.
It was interesting you said that. So the question I had, what accountabilities do your assets have in this space, since we talked about in most of our presentations about the human factors and the unintended consequences of our natural actions and things we do in the OT space. If you don't have any accountability, were you suggesting that there's no accountability on the operation side and it's really managed externally, or that you've embedded your IT into the operations facility so that they can run together?
Well, it comes back to governance, right? So it's understanding within the organization who owns the risk and who drives it. And so and it's why top-down communication is important too, because a plant manager at a site, they get their direction from their VP or whoever's talking to them, so that those VPs need to be on board and communicating. So they understand that they're accountable. They still know at the site level that they're accountable to make all this stuff happen. And the thing about it is with the visual management tool now, there's visibility everywhere. The shop floor guys now have a tool to help them manage and do their job, but the plant manager also has visibility to that. He knows somebody else in corporate's looking at it and tracking it. So it created accountability all throughout the organization by transferring that to a central point and using a system like this to drive it up that way.